Welcome to the Food Junkies Food Addiction Summit.
Here we aim to provide you with the experience, strength, and hope of professionals actively working on the front lines in the field of food addiction.
The purpose of this summit is to educate you and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a disease with abstinence as the solution.
Every day for the month of October, we are sharing one inspiring speaker or highlighted food preparation video from the incredible Tony Vassallo of Moda Nutrition Inc. and the Real Food Revival Movement.
We have 4 weeks of interviews with the leaders in the field of food addiction, clinicians who are working on the front lines, registered dietitians and nutritionists that are working toward bridging the eating disorder and food addiction camps, and people just like you and me.
Here we talk about all things food addiction recovery. Most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive.
So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, and hopefully the message will spread.
And as Vera always says,
the power is ours. Okay. Welcome to the Food Junkies Summit. My name is Vera Tarman, and I am your host today for this amazing interview. Today, we are speaking with two pioneers in the food addiction world, Phil Werdell and Mary Fushi. Both have worked in the trenches of food addiction since the 1980s. In fact, have been influential in the development of services and training for food addiction worldwide. Basically, I don't think I would be exaggerating to say that they are the first to put food addiction on the map. After his studies at Yale University, Phil Werdell started his career as a lead counselor at Glen Bay Food Addiction Program in the 1980s. And I think that might have been one of the first or the first food addiction program in the US. When this was closed down, he co-founded with Mary Fushi Acorn Food Dependency Recovery Services. He also started up the Acorn Food Addiction Professional Training Program, which I do think was the first training program in food addiction in the world. He is co-founder and former chair of the Food Addiction Institute. Phil is also an author and has written a number of books, including he's written a lot, so I'm just going to give a few. Physical Cravings and Food Addiction, a Review of the Science, Bariatric Surgery and Food Addiction, Perioperative Considerations, more recently, Outcome Research on Food Addiction Treatment, and he's just published the second edition of The Disease Concept of Food Addiction.
And this has the science.
Okay, yes, you're gonna get the opportunity to talk about that. Of special interest for us here at Food Junkies podcast, he is also co-author of the first edition of the book Food Junkies: The Truth About Food Addiction. So he's a writer as much as he is a clinician. Next is Mary Fushi. Mary carries a degree in human services with a specialty in addiction studies. Along with Phil, she co-founded the Acorn Food Dependency Recovery Services and its sister Food Addiction Professional Training Program. She is co-author of the manual Food Addiction Recovery, a new model of professional support, the Acorn Primary Intensive. Mary has facilitated numerous groups, workshops, and Acorn intensives throughout the world over the years. Finally, last thing to say about both of them, they are both recovering food addicts with over 30 years of stable recovery from addiction and from weight maintenance. That's it for me. Hello there, Mary and Phil. Okay, so by way of introducing yourselves, this is going to be a bit of a task because I want to hear from both of you equally, and we still have to keep this within an hour. But can each of you, maybe Phil, you can start, just give a short synopsis of how food addiction impacted your life and what was your aha moment? And then Mary, I'll ask you after that. So Phil.
Well, that's very simple. For the first 46 years, I was, I should say, a successful college professor and administrator and a progressively late-stage food addict. And in 1946, it got really bad, and to the place where it had affected my mind and my ability to deal with. And I came to my men's group. I had a men's group, it was just a support group. And a guy there had just come back from alcoholism treatment. And I told him my story, and he said, "Phil, you eat just like I used to drink." That changed my life. I didn't know the word food addict yet, but that began 34 years of recovery, and 2 of them were really tough. Yeah, so I'm a hardcore food addict. Yeah.
So that was
that was the aha that has made
Yeah.
a difference in my life.
Yeah. Can you just give one example of how food dominated your life before that aha moment, before you actually found recovery, just so that our listeners know that you are one of us, as it were?
Well, I gained I lost either 25 or 50 pounds every year. And I gained it back the next year, usually with more. I think that's how I saw it. I saw it as a weight problem, and had a lot of successful dieting experience and tremendous relapse experiences.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So Mary, do you want to give your description of how food addiction was in your life and your aha moment?
Well, excuse me. First of all, food addiction had a horrible impact on my life. I never knew what was wrong with me. I was just morbidly obese from a very young age. I gained and lost 100 pounds 5 different times. I thought if I just tried harder, exerted my willpower, that I would be able to stop eating compulsively. And please excuse me. It was only when I learned about food addiction and became to identify that I was a food addict, and I did that when I was in treatment in 1986, that that was my aha moment. Excuse me so much. When I realized that this was something beyond my control, my willpower to control, that it's actually an illness, and it just, learning that was an aha moment for me.
So how did either of you take this, please? I mean, in the 1980s, which is when you're talking about the time of your aha moment, there wasn't the concept of food addiction floating around. Bill, you heard it in an AA meeting or from an AA meeting, but how did
it was actually not in an AA meeting, but it was an alcoholic in a support group I was in.
So how did you stumble upon the solution then?
Well, he said I should go to Foodaholics Anonymous, which is all he knew. And I had tremendous resistance. And it took me 6 months, and I finally got to one of the 12-step programs. And the basic thing that happened there was another aha moment. I heard the words, put down your binge foods, have 3 moderate meals one day at a time. And I went home and I wrote down my binge foods. There were 76. And on the next day, I didn't eat any of them. And it was the first day that I could remember that I didn't binge. I'll just say, I haven't picked up those foods for 34 years, and I haven't binged. Doing that is a much deeper problem. Yeah.
Well, so you're the way that you approached this one was to identify your binge foods, stop using them, and that was basically your first platform of recovery.
That was the first recovery, right?
Yeah. Did you systematize? Because there wasn't anything systemic at that point. So, how did you both figure out how to? Because I'm thinking that you both were sober since those early days. So,
I found a 12-step program.
Okay. All right.
For me, I was actually, it was in 1986 that I first went to treatment, but I did not stay sober after that. I did not stay abstinent after that. I spent 4 years in and out of relapse, and it was my second hospitalization in inpatient treatment for food addiction in 1990, where I finally, surrendered. But it was at that point when I was in treatment that they introduced me to 12-step fellowship that had strong recovery support. And so then I stayed connected with really strong recovery, not only from the treatment center that I was in with professionals that I was working in, but also in my 12-step support group.
Okay, now you said treatment center, and we don't have treatment centers today. What treatment center are you talking about? Was that Glen Bay?
I went to Glen Bay Hospital in Tampa. Yes. Yeah. Thank God that was there. That hospital closed after many years of being very effective in helping thousands of food addicts due to insurance withdrawing support for food addiction treatment.
How long was that program? Because that's probably the only program that was consistently for food addiction, right?
No,
Like-
there were 5 or 6 at that time. It was, I think, the best, honestly. And it was it was a 6 to 8 week program that
Yeah.
was followed by a halfway house if you needed it.
Wow.
And
How many years did that exist?
it existed between 1985 and 1997.
Wow.
I think it was a little before 97 when it closed. I think it was more like 95. So it was about 10 years
Yeah,
that it
about
was
10
really
years.
in very powerful.
Yeah, so there was a 10-year period of time when we actually had services and we have not picked up since. But actually, so when it closed down, my understanding is both of you moved from your own personal story to making it a professional work because you transformed Glen Bay into something. So do you want to talk about what you did? And I believe that Phil, you're the one who initiated that, but Mary, you were along the way as well, weren't you?
Yes. Well, when Glen Bay Hospital closed, Phil and another woman named Patricia Lutz had been facilitating weekend work retreats for the alumni. And so he was asked to take over the alumni support for the hospital when they closed. And he did that. And then just prior to that, I had gone to Seattle to work with Phil to do a program. We just initiated a week-long program to help people detox. It became the Acorn Primary Intensive once we formed that intensive. But that's how we came about. We formed Acorn basically for the alumni from Glen Bay Hospital. And we did many, many weekends over the course of a year in different parts of the country, primarily in the Northeast.
Right.
The key turned out to, excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
I keep cutting you off, and I'm sorry.
No. I want you to explain more about this.
Okay, well, I had hung my shingle out. I had been a college teacher and wasn't sure I was going to be able to go back into that. My recovery, I was still weak from recovery. I was like a 1-year drug addict. But I tried just doing counseling, being a counselor, and basically the way I did it was I offered people to come to have abstinent meals. They had to pay for the food. I'd cook. And if they wanted, they could stay around and talk. And they did. And it was usually 2 or 3 hours. Everybody did a lot. I enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. They learned a lot. But the thing is, none of them were consistently abstinent. And I said, if this was alcohol, we would be sending you back to treatment. And we tried like hell to find a treatment program that was food addiction based, and couldn't. And one day I turned around to this woman. I said, anybody here have a house? Why don't we just take over a house for a week and we'll do the same things during the week that we did in treatment? And my supervisor said I had to do this with a woman. And Mary was the first person I thought about. So she came and we did what was the first intensive. It wasn't called that. But there were 7 people, all of whom were very chronic relapsers in OA, and one was a multiple personality. It was quite a crew. And they all got abstinent.
Okay.
They all got abstinent in 5 days. I can remember driving back home saying, we have just discovered detox for food addiction.
Yeah, a 5 to 7 day detox.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we started doing it in the Acorn groups that we were doing. And it turned out it worked just as well there. And, when COVID happened, we shifted. It's now Shift Recovery by Acorn, and I'm not with it, but we shifted to doing it online on what's it called?
Virtual.
Virtual, right.
Yeah.
So we do essentially residential intensives with people in their own homes, but they're on this mechanism all 24/7. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So anyway, it's this 5 day. It's 5 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This intensive in like 8 hours or 10 hours. Well, you're saying 24 hours with the thing.
It was 24/7. When we began the first few years, we frequently got up in the middle of the night because somebody was going to go binge.
Ah.
And when people had either emotional issues or food issues, we just started working them.
Yeah.
Before we went to the virtual, when we do the in-person, which we will be getting back to again, everyone will be staying together. On the virtual, the Zoom link is open for people and to be together about 18 hours of the day.
Uh-huh. And part of that, so it's sort of intensive therapy, monitoring, fellowship, all that, but there's also a food plan. And can you say a little bit about that food plan for our listeners? Like, you have your version of what's called the Food Abstinent Program. And what did that look like? Mary, do you want to take it?
Sure.
We have a little book that Mary and I wrote, which has the food plan in it. So we could do it in more detail. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah. The food plan, it came originally from Glen Bay Hospital of Tampa. It has been modified slightly over the years. It's basically a 3 meal a day plus a snack at night. It eliminates the commonly addictive foods, which is all forms of flour, all forms of sugar, including any artificial sweeteners, any kind of flour, not just wheat flour, but any kind of flour. It also eliminates caffeine and alcohol and high salt, high fat. And those are the most common addictive foods that we have found. And then it is also a weighted measured food plan that deals with the compulsive. Oftentimes some people are actually have like a volume addiction. I think that's one of my strongest addictions is to volume. So it helps to put parameters and boundaries around not eating too much and not eating too little. And things are broken down very specifically so that you eat certain food categories at each meal.
Okay. And so how many of these Acorn intensives, that's what they were called, would you have in a year? Like, were we talking like every third weekend or like how many would you have?
Yeah, about that, about every third. Yeah. We tried to do 2 a month.
Two
and
a
it was
month?
all over the East Coast. It was New Jersey, Chicago, well, actually the Midwest, Chicago, Midwest, Boston.
Okay.
We would rent a house, same way we did in Seattle. And we would come out there and they would come out there and then we'd do a week together. Yeah.
Yeah.
There were sometimes when we would do 2 a month, but we did more of the weekends, and then we would do about an intensive about a month, and then we would do weekends in between.
And what was the success of these intensives?
Well, I mean, it's not well known, but the success of this type, the Glen Bay model, either at the Glen Bay Hospital or at some other hospitals, which were up at the time, and our residential retreat and other ones put together by Kay Shepard and other people, is really quite substantial. And we knew that because they were coming back as alumni, and 10% would be in relapse, but most of them would be coming back abstinent. And we finally did a survey, 7 pages, everything from our alumni, and we found out that 5 years later, I'm rounding off some figures here. 5 years later, a third of the people had been abstinent back to back from the intensive. Another third were abstinent, but they'd had a couple of relapses, often gone back to more intensives. So the recovery rate is very high. We put that out in a book. I don't have it with me.
Yeah, is that outcome, that one that you just got published about food addiction outcomes?
Well, that actually is we pulled that back. We need to do some more work on that.
Okay, I'm gonna get some more info on your.
Oh, this is the book. It's on Amazon, and it has the structure of the intensive, exactly what we did. It has really quite a bit of information in, including the 12-step groups that we referred people to, and
more about the outcome.
Yeah, and it has a short summary of that outcome survey.
Is that the book you showed me a minute ago?
No,
it's this one.
There we go. Okay, right on. Okay, good. Good. And you mentioned something about how you're not doing it now because it's moved to shift. So it's the same model though? Like
Yeah.
basically
It is exactly this. It's exactly the same program. 2.5 years ago, there's somebody named Amanda Leith who had
Yeah.
come to us. She was already working in the drug and alcohol field, and she came to us to get some training about food addiction, and found out that it was something that she needed herself personally support for. So she became interested in the program, and she lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, and said, I can set one of these intensives up in Vancouver. And I said, oh, no. And this was after a couple of years. And she said, I can do this. And I said, you have no idea what it takes to put one of these together. And she did. And she put it together. And we had several in Vancouver. And then at 2.5 years ago, she actually purchased the business from us, from Phil and Mary. And she had just changed the name to Shift Recovery by Acorn. And the Shift stands for sobriety, hope, freedom, and transformation. That's what the Shift stands for. And they do intensives. It's the same model, only she's expanded it more.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So for listeners, there is she does it in Vancouver, but also does it in the US. There is
And
still
it's going on virtually. I mean,
Yeah.
we've
Oh,
had
right.
people all over the world. We've had people
Yeah.
from Africa, Middle East, Europe,
Yeah.
in the
So this-
intensives. Yeah,
So this
recently.
5-day intensive, every once a month at least, something
Yeah.
like that. Okay, so out of that program, which by the way, I attended one of those, so I actually got to witness what that was like to have, breakfast, afternoon, dinner, and the middle of the night fellowship. But out of that came understanding this sister sort of training program. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, when we created the Food Addiction Institute, when I called a meeting, the people there that were recovering food addicts said we would like a professional training program.
Mm,
And it was interesting. You almost have to be in recovery to be one of these early startups. It really, you have to have a passion for it. But
Yeah.
so we did, and we created it with the Food Addiction Institute and Acorn. And it turned out that the people that wanted to come actually almost always had a lot of recovery themselves to do first. I mean, it was just amazing. People who had been in the 12-step rooms for a long time, but they didn't have a stable abstinence, or they didn't know how to deal with emotional stuff that 12-step programs doesn't deal with, or they didn't have the experience dealing with denial. There's no feedback in the 12-step programs.
Yeah.
So they would come and we would say, well, we'd like you to start by doing an intensive. And they would do 2 intensives the first year.
Yeah.
And the goal was to get them to the second year and have them be abstinent and have written a very detailed first step, the exact story of how they are powerless over food. And then they would start assisting us, and then we had a whole range of things that people did. People's needs were different. I was teaching food addiction in college by that time, so I had a little bit of a range of places we could go with that. But basically, one of the people that came was Esther
Helga.
Yeah. Right. Who's now in Iceland. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she came. She actually had already started a program in Iceland, but as soon as she finished the 3 years, she said, "I want you to come out and do an international training program." So we did in Iceland, and trained her staff, and out of that developed INFACT, which you'll probably have, but INFACT is what would be that? What's that? But it's it's teaching people to be professional counselors in food addiction.
Yeah, it's the International Food Addiction and Counseling Training.
Right. Yeah.
So she started with you as a client in the program, then moved into the professional aspect, which was kind of like an internship in the program, right?
Yeah.
And then she took it over to Iceland and started INFACT. So that's how that all happened.
Well, she started a thing called UFM. She actually started an outpatient treatment program before she
Yeah.
met us. She just said, I need help.
Yeah, she already had a program in Iceland called MFM,
Yeah.
and yes,
Mhm.
and so she was already experiencing, having working with other clients, food addicts in Iceland, and she came to us really for support for her own work and what she was doing.
And then we
Right.
supported the staff that she had.
Yeah, and you were going over there, participating in that. In fact, you're still doing it virtually.
Well,
Yeah.
I still hope to get over there physically.
Again,
Yeah.
I love Iceland, yeah. But the
Yeah, I know.
it's the program is separate. In fact, it's separate from MFM, and has taken off and is without any doubt the best place to train for food addiction right now.
Yeah,
I would like it if they had a 1-year internship.
Yeah.
They did work like we did in Acorn. Ours was a 3-year program. Theirs is about a year and a half.
Yeah. Are you still doing your Acorn food addiction training program, or is that
We have
based-
people in it, but we aren't recruiting anybody.
Right, okay.
We're now going to Infect. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it really is like, in fact, is the evolution, the most recent. Evolution.
yes,
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah. So now we've talked about the program, we've talked about your professional thing. Phil, can you talk a little bit about your books? So I mentioned a few of them, and I think writing I think that's your first love, isn't it?
I don't know if it's my first love, but when I was, before I went to kindergarten, my mother gave me her Underwood typewriter, and I was typing several hours a day. And that has stayed with me. So I have been writing all my life. I wrote probably a dozen books on educational reform, and I was editor of a national magazine. So this is, it's not something that I love. It's something I have to do, is really the truth. Anyhow, the thing that happened was when I got over to Glen Bay, and I'm now working for them, what I felt was that we needed a book that we could give to people when they were introducing. And I told my sponsor, and he says, "That's you, write it." I says, I got to put my abstinence first. I can't be out there trying to write a book. He says, "Well, I would like you to call in your food and commit to be abstinent and then write." So I wrote this book.
Okay, let's see it again.
It's called The Disease Concept of Food Addiction.
Wow.
And what it is, by then I was giving the lecture that explained the characteristics of food addiction. It was very experiential. We would take people through, do you have physical craving, loss of control, powerlessness, chronic progressive withdrawal? There is a lot of withdrawal from food addiction. And and so I wrote, one of the things I know how to do is to write the experiences that we do up as books. And so this is the experience of being in one of those initial lectures. And I've always thought that we needed to pass that on. But what happened is I wrote it and I used it for, I don't know, a few months maybe. And then Kay Shepard's book, Food Addiction, came out. And there are a couple other ones that came out. They were better. They were better not because they were better books, but because they covered more and introduced people to the 12 steps as well. And this one didn't. So this has been fallow, been sitting in my files for 30 years. No,
but you just got a second edition of that.
This is the second edition. So, and I started giving it out to the people in the professional training program. They said, "You should publish this." I had also given it out to a lot of clients, and a couple of the clients in particular had taken it to their psychiatrist because they wanted them to be able to understand what food addiction was.
Right.
And the comments that came back from the psychiatrist were, "This is all anecdotal. This doesn't prove anything." So that got me into into the research and now into the attempt to get this established as an official disease by the APA. But in this book, we also put another thing that we did, which is I got the initial advisory board for the Food Addiction Institute, really very, very substantial and prestigious people. And we put together a kind of established the credibility of the Institute. We published about a 20-page essay on the science of food addiction, which by that time had become and still is quite substantial. So so that's now in here. So you get to the end, and well, that's very interesting, Phil, but this is all anecdotal. And then there is a really good readable survey of the professional literature. You don't have to be a professional. You have to skip some of the words if you're not a professional, but it's very readable, and it shows that food addiction is a disease exactly like alcoholism and drug addiction.
And I remember on the website for the Food Addiction Institute, for the longest time, you had a huge bibliography of all somebody, I don't know if it was you or one of your...
We put together a bibliography of 1,732 peer-reviewed articles.
Yeah, I mean, before Joan Iflin's book that, came out not that long ago is, full of all sorts of, notations, citations. Yes. Yours was the stuff earlier than that, and it was like this humongous list.
Right. People wanted me to break it down, and I said I'd like to break it down too, but I am doing some other jobs right now.
Yeah, so I don't know if that...
We just let it up there, and it isn't up anymore. So.
Oh, okay. So Mary, you wrote the Food Addiction Recovery Manual, like the ACORN Primary Intensive. Do you have a copy of that to show us?
Yes, that was the one that we talked about earlier that has the outcome. They had the outcome research, and this is just a little book that really details the primary intensive that we do, where it came about, what we do, and what the results are.
Okay, all right, good. Phil, did you want to say anything more about some of your other books? Like I know that you mentioned, earlier on you wrote the bariatric book. Like this was
one of the first books on bariatric surgery and food addiction. We started having people coming in who were I called them bariatric surgery failures. Bariatric surgery does not work if you are advanced in food addiction to a certain degree. There's another book out actually that does that better now. But I wanted to say something, but my memory I just lost my memory.
Well, we were talking about the bariatric surgery book, which was quite a book at that time, and then you also had Physical Cravings, a review of the science. I don't know.
Bariatric surgery book. What we found out is that they weren't publishing any statistics about success or failure. But we found out by talking to people who had access to the reports bariatric surgeons have to keep, that somewhere between 20 and 40% of the people, 20% of the people either weren't losing any weight or had regained it by the end of the first year. And another 20% either were becoming addicted to alcohol or drugs or also had relapsed. And my sense was these are the food addicts.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book essentially for bariatric. Wrote that for bariatric surgeons.
Yeah.
They didn't read it. They weren't interested.
Is that Mary? You have to talk so we can. It highlights you. No, talk, Mary. So
I'm sorry. Yes, this is the book that Phil wrote on bariatric surgery and food addiction.
Excellent, great. Yeah.
Pre-operative considerations, and it's not that like he gives a case against bariatric surgery. That's not it at all. But it's the educational piece that goes about so that people that may be food addicted, know what they're going to be up against, and think about it. Yeah.
There is now one bariatric surgeon in the South. I won't give his name. I'm not sure he wants publicity, but who, if you to have surgery with him, you have to go to Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous, one of the 12-step programs, for a month beforehand. You've got to do it during the surgery and afterwards for 3 months. So
Yeah.
he essentially puts the surgery in the context of a recovery from food addiction, which is very different than just changing the size of your
Absolutely.
stomach. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to me that it's not against, like you said, it's not against bariatric surgery, but if you want bariatric surgery to work and be sustainable, you need to know
Yeah.
this information. That's what
Yeah, we've had a lot of people who had bariatric surgery. One person had it 4 or 5 times, and they came to us, got abstinent. Not all of them, but most of them. So that if they had this available to them after their surgery,
Yeah.
this would have been a really good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just
Okay.
to be able to go to Overeaters Anonymous or Food Addicts Anonymous. Yeah.
All right. So now let's sort of look more at some of the work that you actually do. So I want to say, what's your unique contribution? But I mean, it's food addiction. You brought food addiction, like I said, on the map. But what was it that you would actually, what did you find for people who are listening, especially the clinicians? What did you find that worked, and what were the struggles in the actual trenches of working with food addicts that was maybe different than?
Do you want to do that, Mary?
Yeah.
What was actually different? What were some of the struggles? Well,
Yeah.
primarily, I think, and then what, Doctor?
Some of the wins after that. Well, let's
Yeah.
start with the struggles.
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult challenges in doing this work, especially in the way that we do it with just a week long, is that so many of the initial days, if people do not come in detoxed, they are going through detox for many of the days. And so we are a holding place for that. We are a place for people to do that. However, in that case, they really need a lot more than just the week long, because so much of that's a unique challenge that we find people coming in, and also.
Mary, let me interrupt. Just because Phil mentioned this earlier, and a lot of people don't believe this, but can you give me an example of what you mean by they've come in with detox? What were they actually experiencing that was getting in the way of?
Oh, yeah, many people, well, first of all, they're detoxing usually from sugar, flour, and caffeine, some from alcohol. There can be, people can be nauseated, people can throw up, people often have extreme headaches from detoxing from those substances. They'll fall asleep, and they're just sitting there, but they're sleeping through much of it. Headaches, and usually people are pretty irritable, which we certainly understand. But they're in cravings. People just want to do whatever they can to get out, to get the food. And so the detox is very, very real. And it's amazing that people, usually by about day 3, people are crawling the walls to get to their substance.
Just like day 4 and 5, they are different people. We think it's mainly the sugar detox, but it's about 3 days.
Right.
That's the main one people go through with us.
So
people that have a caffeine detox often have to come back in a month, and we have to have a longer program that supports that too.
Right. When we did the Renaissance program, which was a 4-week program, we found that it took about 10 days for people to really be on board. And there you are trying to do this in 5 days. So the intensive part was day 3, eh? That was the worst?
No, that was when the disease was the worst. But the thing that I think is unique about this, and I really would like other people to be able to do it, is that first of all, we deal with people around their abstinence the same way we did in treatment. Everybody has a peer sponsor and commits their food very specifically every day. And then at the end, during the groups, one of the issues is what comes up. If you have detox coming up, you find out, you might really be addicted. If you aren't able to do it, which people often are not, people are not able to say, I'll have oatmeal and an apple for breakfast and do that. I mean, that's how out of control people are. And at the other end, there are some people that literally leave so they can go binge somewhere.
Right.
Leave the intensive.
Yeah.
Maybe one every 4 or 5 intensives. So,
Wow.
the cravings and the out of control are very, very strong. And we begin by focusing everything through the food. So can you commit to this food, eat it, and be honest about it afterwards? Well, some people who weren't able to do it weren't able to be honest. One of the big problems in the 12-step programs is people lie to their sponsors. Well, that's this. So that's the first thing we do. And then whatever comes up, it might be, I don't understand what you mean by addiction. I don't want to be an addict, or whatever the issues are that come up. We deal with them, but also the feelings come up. And we, as you know, from being around, if somebody really has not ever expressed anger, we allow them very quickly to go through some intensive anger work, not to therapize them, but for them to be able to know that that's a feeling they can have, they can express and let out of their body. And so we do fear and anger and tantrum work and grieving. And then every day from the beginning, people are doing what we call first step preparation assignments. So we take the same ones that were used at Glen Bay, did them over 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 weeks. But they, by the last day, the last writing, they actually write a description of what it is, what their experience is when they are powerless. Not tell me that it happened. Tell me exactly what went on. And we have developed a process where people can do that. We call it incidents of powerlessness. And that they are as effective in challenging denial as whole first steps sometimes. So we do all those things together. And I think you're right. The people, I and other people at work have a strange combination of being able to do all of those and manage all at one time. But we also know that other people can do this, because we've had many other people lead these intensives, and they've been successful too.
Yeah, so essentially you're managing withdrawal and introducing these exercises of denial and whatnot throughout, plus the emotional regularity. But just to get back, Mary, to you, you were I interrupted you because you were going to tell me some struggle once you had the first struggle was the withdrawal process. So what else beyond that, and how did you manage that?
I think that one of the common struggles that many people have is believing that it's their fault, believing that if they just tried harder, believing that, that they're the ones that put the food in the mouth, in their mouths. Nobody was feeding them. So it's really hard for people to realize how truly powerless or out of control they are with food. People often think that they are in control, that they are the ones that are choosing to eat.
Yeah.
And so, and how we deal with that in the intensive is through the process of the step of the work that we do with the questions. Start writing on a time when you thought that you were going to go to your party and not eat any of the birthday cake, go to a party and not eat any of the birthday cake. And then what happened? And people begin to slowly see from their own experience, number one, the foods that they binge on, the emotions that sometimes lead to them, telling themselves that they'll do it this time, and then seeing what happens. And that is a real, it's such a huge roadblock for people to get, that I can't control this thing. It's a brain disease that I can't do on my own. And
it's really kind of like a step one, recognizing how truly powerless we are.
Yes.
So what are some wins that you have? And I'm going to just boast about you, Mary. I mean, one win is you. I don't know how much weight you lost. We're talking triple digits, right?
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I could share screen, but I've maintained between 195 and 200 pound weight loss for like 28 years. My top weight was 340 pounds. I weighed 270 pounds when I was in 7th grade, and in high school, 300 pounds. And the fact I've lost 100 pounds 5 different times, the miracle that I have not eaten my addictive foods now for over 31 years is just astounding. But I truly believe that my body is different than a normal eater. And when I eat certain foods, I do not know whether I'm going to be able to stop and and how much I'm going to consume in it. So therefore those particular foods and that I just have to do whatever I can to not do that. I mean, that's a lot. It takes a lot in order to sustain that. But today I'm not they call it white knuckling it, where you just, I want it. I don't. The freedom that I have from wanting it, from craving it, from having to have it, from abstaining it's just gone.
When you sit at the table, do you say, I feel deprived and I want?
Never. Does the thought cross my mind once in a while? Oh yeah, we'll be driving around and I'll just say to Phil, oh, I wish we could go to have an ice cream cone. Does the thought cross my mind? Sometimes, yes, but it is so easily set aside by what I know what the consequences would be if I were to do that. And Phil and I, the foods that we eat which are very clean, non-processed, protein, starches, vegetables, fats, fruits, they satisfy us. Many times we'll get done with our meal and go, oh my God, that is so good. And when I used to be binging, I thought these kind of foods were, oh no, I don't want those. No, I don't feel deprived today.
So I mean, are you in the work that you've done? Would you say that your experience is typical or unusual?
I would say when people get into recovery and sustain recovery, it is typical. Yeah, it is unusual for people to be willing to surrender to the level of structure and support that people need, and to not play with it. I know I played with it for a long time. It kept me in relapse for a number of years. But it is typical for people who continue to see themselves as food addicted and treat themselves as food addicted.
Okay, great. I just want people to hear that this is not unusual, but if you're in this world of food recovery, it's actually pretty typical. So now, as a clinician, so this is for both of you, is there something that you have learned about, a tool that you've used, or something that has changed, you've become more flexible about, or you have a different idea about from early days to now? Because you guys have been around for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, one of the big aha moments around that was when I got out of Glen Bay Hospital, Tampa. I was given this food plan, and I thought that it was the only food plan that anybody could be abstinent on. If you're not on this food plan, you can't possibly be abstinent. And one of the things that I have learned is that some people are addicted to cannot have any form of starch or grains. Some people cannot have any form of fruit. That's rare, but sometimes that is the case. When we first had, the food plan originally had artificial sweeteners on it. That has really changed over the years, so that now, and there are some people who can manage artificial sweeteners. And I think that has been one of the things that has really shifted for me in my approach to working professionally with people. That there are variations amongst people. I honestly think that that some people approach it as that there's way too many variations. I don't think that that's the case. I think it's narrower than most people want to admit, in food addiction. But I do know that even within somebody who's a highly progressed food addict and is highly sensitive to certain foods, there is a little bit of wiggle room, depending upon the individual's biochemistry and history around particular foods.
Yeah, and I often use Phil's developments of mild, middle, late stage food addicts as you can get away with a lot early days that you can't when you're progressed. Anyway, Phil, did you want to say anything that has changed?
Well, I wanted to just say that I support what Mary said. When we came in, we did when you were on Glen Bay, you couldn't try another food plan until you did theirs. And I think 90% of the people came off on that food plan. And it had enormous success. As I said, 70% were abstinent 5 years later. A couple of them had, half of them, those had relapsed a little, but that's just outrageous for addiction. But very soon, the other 12-step fellowships have their own food plans. So people would come in with that food plan and they had to have it. We'd look at it and say, that seems reasonable. And so we started saying that if you've been abstinent for a month on that food plan, you can use
90 days, 90 days.
90 days now? See, she's a little more flexible than me. So if you've been abstinent on it, then you can use that. So that some people come in and don't even use the food plan that we're recommending. And it works, and that works.
So aside from the food plan, any therapeutics that have changed over the years?
I would say no. I came in as a fairly skilled experiential therapist. And so that I knew how to help people who weren't able to state their feelings, to learn to state them and share them, and people who weren't able to feel them to be able to feel them, and even how to move people pretty quickly into traumatic places where they were actually blocking them. And we don't try to do therapy at all, but we use those techniques when something's in the way of their abstinence. That's the rule. Well, the person's so angry they can't be abstinent. Well, then they're going to do some anger work. So we would do experiential work. And for me, I've been doing that all along. And actually, that's a way that ACORN and ACORN Shift are different than many of the other programs. A lot of food programs say you shouldn't do any emotional work until after you're abstinent. And I've always said, what about the people that can't get abstinent without doing emotional work? Well, we have a lot of them. And so we do some of that. Yeah,
I would agree. That is something that's unique about your program more than others. Okay, so now let me ask you, pushback. What kind of pushback have you had over the years, and how have you managed that? And I mean, the Food Addiction Institute, I'm sure, has had been very aware of the professional pushback. But any comments about that? I don't know, Mary or Phil, whoever wants to jump on that one.
Well, yeah, the difficult thing has been the level of, you could say, ignorance, lack of knowledge about food addiction from the professionals. So half the people that come in think that they have an eating disorder, and if they deal with their feelings, they're going to be abstinent then. And there's a whole part of Overeaters Anonymous that has that kind of implicitly in their programs. It doesn't work very well for people that are food addicted. If a person isn't food addicted, that works, and they get one victory. So,
Phil, I have to say that we owe you a great gratitude, because I think it was the Food Addiction Institute, with you spearheading at that time, that tried to get food addiction on the agenda for the DSM-5, and it didn't get there, but at least it got raised.
It got raised, and it got put into the DSM, it isn't a category. What we're looking for is food as a substance use disorder. That's the one. And if you go to the eating disorder section of the DSM, you'll find that it says many people who have eating disorders also have all the characteristics of a substance use disorder. And that came after we walked into the DSM meetings, and I was waving our paper, and they took it and they spread it around. The resistance isn't that it isn't true. The resistance is that there are interests. There are real substantial interests in not having it be food addiction. One of them is the diet industry. Another was the bariatric surgery industry. All of these people are competing for insurance money. And plus all of the people that have their own idea about how to recover, which, there's as many diets and therapies for eating disorders as there are therapists. So we don't run into that. The resistance we run into at ACORN is that we have to deal with the fact that people have been told that.
Right.
And so we have this lecture, Normal Eater, Emotional Eater, Food Addict, which we
Right.
do every time. We teach people the difference between obesity, eating disorders, and food addiction.
Yeah.
And that's part of their first step, is to get, it's not just that I'm fat. It's not just that I eat when I have a feeling. It's that I'm actually powerless over some of these foods, like a drug addict. So
Yeah.
One pushback that I find so much is I can't do this forever. This is completely unrealistic. This doesn't make any sense. I can't do this in the real world. And what we tell people is if I'm a food addict, the real world for me is where I can get support for my food addiction recovery. It would just be like if I needed dialysis. And I remember working for a publishing company in Chicago, and there was a woman there who needed dialysis, and we had a separate office set up for her to go into when she needed to have her dialysis. And she worked her work schedule around when she needed to have her dialysis done. And that's the same way with food addiction. This is a progressive chronic disease, and we so tell people, can you just do it today? Can you just not have sugar today? Can you get through it a day at a time? Because it does seem daunting and unreasonable and impossible when you think about, I'm never going to have birthday cake again, or I'm never going to have, go on this vacation and do XYZ. But, whatever. And so we teach people how to prioritize the needs as a food addict, as a person with a disease. What do they need to do? And one day at a time. So that's a strong pushback that we get.
Okay. And if we were to turn it around and say, so what is an ingredient of success that you need to see? What would you say that would be? Like the one day at a time, or what is it when you see somebody doing this, okay, they're gonna make it? Like, what's the secret of success, basically?
There are several. I think that one that stands out for me is asking for support, not thinking that I can do it all on my own, not thinking that I have to do it all on my own, and really getting extraordinary support to make the decisions. Because if I'm 30 years old and I'm just going into treatment for food addiction, I've got 30 years of making decisions about food, probably pretty much on my own. And they really haven't worked very well if they've gotten me to this place where I'm suddenly in desperate need. And so it really is so important that people get that we can't do this alone and to ask for help.
Okay. What about you, Phil? What's the secret of success that you hope?
well, the one that was hardest for me was rigorous honesty. I used to think I was the most honest person people know. You can tell I'm very self-revealing. I always have been. And I pretty much talk about anything and say anything about myself. So I thought, I'm already honest. My sponsor said, I want you to report if you didn't eat what you committed. I could almost not do that. I mean, I didn't eat exactly what I committed, and I almost decided not to go back to and do the next day because it was too shameful to be able to say that. And what she taught me, you can put the book up, is how to do food slip inventories. So we teach people how to talk about the mistakes they've made and how to correct them in a very practical way, both with the food and with the feelings and with spiritual issues. It would be nice to have a hospital as strong as Glen Bay that was backing us up.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. So actually, my next question is, what are your hopes for the food addiction future? I think you just walked into that one.
Yeah. Well,
hospital.
I always like to start it by saying, would you think that people would be going into treatment for nicotine addiction 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Well, I watched television and the doctors were all smoking. And that's completely turned around. The doctors have changed. There's treatment now, and it's a tough addiction. And we now have it's a norm that we shouldn't be smoking in public places. I mean, what that would look like for food addicts is that there's always a menu that has no sugar or flour on it.
Oh my God, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, it would make life easier. But my hope is that number one, I start with the food addict, that the education is done and that treatment becomes available. And the big problem for many people is money. So getting insurance, and therefore getting the big organizations like the American Psychiatric Association to call this an addiction, so that doctors can be paid to treat it. Then they'll be willing to be trained to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and facilities be covered. Yeah,
that's sure. Right.
Mary, what about you? Oh, sorry.
No,
that is absolutely my hope, that there's more education, there's more acceptance of food addiction, and that a lot of the I hate to use the word fat shaming, but a lot of the fat shaming that goes on would cease, and people would be more open to the fact that perhaps these people have something more than just they can't stop eating. And I know for me, I decided I'd eat till I died because I couldn't stop. I used to pray as a kid that I would die in my sleep because I couldn't manage the hell of being an active food addiction. And to be free today, I would wish that for everyone who suffers from this disease and this addiction.
Okay, thank you. So we're just about at the end. I have one question and then the final question. So my last question before the final one is, do you have a message of hope to give somebody who's listening? It could be a repetition of what you said, or just...
I think every single person, if they are with other people who have been abstinent, can be abstinent. Yes. And if they're with a professional in a treatment situation for a few weeks to a couple of months, like alcoholics and drug addicts often have to be, they can get a deep turnaround. Yes, I just one other thing I wanted to say, which is to push the Food Addiction Institute and their conference on June 18th, where among other, you and I talked there, but Robert Lustig talked, and he said that his idea now is to get clear about something that's been obvious all along, that sugar is not a food. It's an additive.
Yeah.
And if sugar is an additive, but it's classified by the Food and Drug Administration as a food, they can't regulate it. But if that was an additive, then they could regulate that just like they regulate harmful drugs. And so to me, that looks like a place where we might be able to make the type of turn that has been made with cigarette addiction. Yeah.
The hope that I would tell people is that it's possible to have a life free from the bondage of food addiction, free from craving, free from excess, obesity, free from gaining and losing. It takes work. It takes surrender. It takes struggle, and a beautiful life of freedom from that is absolutely available.
Wow!
If you don't know what the problem is, then can't work on it. If you are a food addict and don't know you're a food addict, or if you're still in denial and you really still are, then that's the problem that has to be faced. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So final question is the signature question that we ask everybody, and that is, what would you tell your younger self, either as a teenager or when you were a food addict, that now, coming from your place of wisdom now, what would you tell your younger self? Mary, do you want to pick it up there?
I would say, honey, it's not your fault. You're lovable and beautiful, and there's help available for you. Just, it's okay. You don't have to do any of this alone. It's not your fault.
Thank you. Phil?
Well, it's very similar. You can be honest about what's really going on, and the fact that you're powerless in some situations, like when you start binging or when other things too, or purging. That is something that people can recover from if they have help. And you just need to be able to be with people that can be with help. We now meet people who are going to Overeaters Anonymous at a very young age, and to Food Addicts Anonymous. It's new, but I would have been good if there'd been a 12-step program for food where there was good recovery. That would have been good for me as a high school student. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, so that ends. Thank you. This was a fabulous interview. I just want to close off by saying we stand on the shoulders of giants, and these two, Phil Wardell and Mary Fushi, are both giants in the field of food addiction. I mean that sincerely and genuinely. Thank you so much for spending time with us and with our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today on the Food Junkies Food Addiction Summit.
If you would like to hear more, tune in every Friday to the Food Junkies podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Audible, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcast. Subscribe so you'll never miss a show.
Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, which is available on Amazon.
If you have any additional questions, both Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals and work one-on-one with clients. Their websites and email addresses are available at foodjunkiespodcast.com.
As Vera always says, the power is ours.